It was back in high school, probably junior year. I don't remember the exact month, but it was definitely fall. Leaves were already all over the ground, and everything had that dry, earthy smell. It was the kind of day where the air was cool but not cold, and the wind was light enough that you barely noticed it unless you stopped moving. My friend Sam and I had nothing going on that Saturday, so we decided to hang out in the woods behind his neighborhood. It wasn't a park or anything, just a big stretch of trees and brush that led out behind a few blocks of houses. There were some old dirt paths, probably made by kids over the years, and a few deer trails if you knew what to look for. We used to go out there to smoke or just walk around and talk about whatever. That day was one of those times. We must have been out there for maybe half an hour, just walking slow and kicking through the leaves, when I saw the dog. It was a medium-sized black dog, kind of mutt-looking, short hair, not really big but not small either. It didn't bark or growl or anything, just walked past us maybe 20 or 30 feet away, head low like it was tracking something. At first, we didn't think much of it. There were always dogs in the area. People let them loose all the time even though they weren't supposed to. But it didn't have a leash or collar, and it wasn't really running or playing like a loose dog usually does. It just kind of wandered by without paying us any attention. A minute or two later, this kid came from the same direction. He looked young, maybe 13 or 14. Skinny, pale, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in a while. He wasn't crying or yelling, just walking fast, looking around like he was trying to spot something. We figured he was looking for the dog, so we called out and asked if he needed help. He nodded, kind of slow, then walked over to us, said he was watching the dog for a friend and it got out of the backyard. He said the dog had been running through the woods and he couldn't catch up. We didn't have anything better to do, so we offered to help. He didn't really say much, just pointed in the direction the dog went and started walking. We followed. At first, it wasn't anything weird, just the usual trails, scattered trees, leaves crunching under our feet. The dog would show up every now and then, always a little ahead of us, walking or sometimes trotting. Never too fast, never barking. Every time we thought we were getting closer, it would dip behind a group of trees or go over a small rise and disappear again. Then the boy would point and start walking that way. We figured he must have known the woods better than us, or maybe he had done this before. We just kept following. We didn't notice how far we had gone until we realized we couldn't hear anything but ourselves. No traffic, no dogs barking in the distance, not even birds. Just whined through the trees and the sound of our own footsteps. That's when I started getting a weird feeling in my stomach. I didn't say anything though, because Sam seemed fine and I didn't want to be the one to freak out over nothing. The ground had started to change, too. Softer, more pine needles than leaves, and more uneven. Roots stuck out more and there were fewer clear paths. The trees were taller here, thicker, older. The sun had dropped lower and the shadows stretched longer. It didn't feel like the woods behind a neighborhood anymore. It felt deeper, like we had crossed some invisible line into somewhere else. Eventually, I managed to get close enough to the dog that I could almost touch it. It had stopped near a fallen log and was sniffing around. I crouched down and held my hand out, speaking soft, trying not to scare it. It looked at me, ears twitching, but didn't run. I reached slowly, but then I noticed it wasn't wearing a collar. Nothing to grab onto, just bare fur around the neck. I looked back at Sam to tell him, and we spent maybe 10 or 15 seconds talking about what to do. I said maybe we could try to corner it or find a stick to loop a jacket or something around its neck. When we turned back, gone. Dog and kid. No sound, no movement, no sign they had even been there. We both stood there for a second, not sure what had just happened. It wasn't like they walked off slowly and we didn't notice. It was like they just blinked out of the picture. We called out, yelled the kid's name even though I don't think he ever told us what it was. Nothing, just trees and silence. We walked around the area, thinking maybe they were just behind a tree or up ahead a bit, but we didn't hear any footsteps, no leaves rustling, no snapping twigs. And like I said, it was fall. Even a squirrel running through the underbrush makes noise that time of year. But there was nothing. We started walking back in the direction we thought we came from, but it didn't look the same. No familiar landmarks, no familiar breaks in the trees. The paths looked different, less traveled, and we didn't recognize anything. The sun was dropping faster than we expected, and shadows were everywhere. Everything felt still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. We didn't run, but we definitely picked up the pace. Took us over an hour to find our way back out. We finally came across a spot we recognized, some graffiti on a big rock near the tree line, and from there we made it back to Sam's backyard. By that time, it was almost dark. We didn't say much once we got back. Just sat on the porch for a while, trying to figure out what had happened. The weirdest part still isn't that they vanished. It's how quiet it was. Even when you're out in the woods alone, there's always something making noise. Birds, bugs, wind, something. But when that kid and that dog disappeared, it was like the forest just shut off. Like everything went still for a reason. We never saw the kid again. We asked around, checked the local Facebook groups and stuff later that week. Nobody reported a missing kid or dog. No one said anything about a kid house sitting or watching someone's dog. It was like he never existed. We even went back out to the woods a couple weeks later during the day, followed the same trail as far as we could, but we couldn't find the spot where we lost them. No log, no open patch, nothing looked the same. It was like the forest swallowed that whole piece of land and shifted it around while we weren't looking. To this day, Sam and I still talk about it sometimes. It's not like we think something supernatural happened. We don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. But something about that day wasn't right. Maybe the kid was running away from something. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Maybe he let us out there on purpose to waste our time while he slipped away. I don't know. What I do know is that it doesn't make sense. We were watching them. The dog was right in front of me. We turned away for a few seconds. That's it. No sound. No movement. Just gone. We looked. We called. We listened. And we got nothing. Whatever the reason, whatever the truth is, I don't think we'll ever get an answer. We were just two high school kids who followed a stranger into the woods and came back with questions we'll probably never be able to answer. All I know for sure is that I haven't trusted quiet woods the same way since. It was late, sometime around 10 or 11 at night, deep in the Australian bush. I was 17, wearing full camo, leading a staggered line of about 60 cadets along a narrow dirt track. We were heading to our detachment campsite after a long day of drills and exercises. Because of light discipline, only two of us were using torches, me at the front and the other flight commander holding up the rear. The rest of the cadets walked in near darkness, relying on what little moonlight cut through the trees. The torches weren't for us, really. They were for safety in case a vehicle came down the track. Most of the group needed to preserve their night vision anyway. We were all dressed to blend into the dark. No bright clothing, no noise, barely a whisper between us. I was used to the dark. The bush at night doesn't scare me in the usual sense. You hear things, sure. Distant rustling, the occasional flap of wings, a branch snapping under something's weight. But out there, you learn to tell the difference between a kangaroo jumping through the scrub and something you should worry about. We'd been briefed about snakes and other animals, and everyone carried their gear properly. I wasn't worried about that. As we moved further in, with only my torch cutting a narrow cone through the black, I started noticing something strange along the sides of the trail. Every time I looked left or right, I saw these tiny, glowing blue dots, just quick flashes, like little gems catching the light. I thought at first they were bits of dew or maybe shards of glass from an old bottle. They were the size of raindrops and glinted like something clean and wet. But the pattern wasn't random. They were everywhere, at the base of trees, in the leaf litter, along the roots that broke through the path. Always watching from just beyond the torch's edge. Kept happening. I'd sweep the light, and there they were again. Dot after dot. Some single, some in little clusters. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I had to stay in position, keep the formation moving, keep my pace. But I started to feel off. Not scared exactly, just wrong. Like I was walking through something that didn't want me there. After about 30 minutes of hiking, we stopped for a short rest. Not long, just enough time for everyone to check their packs, shift their weight, take a breath. I stepped off to the side of the trail, torch still clipped to my head, and finally had the chance to really look at those glowing dots. I crouched near a patch where I'd seen a few of them and brought the light in close. What I saw didn't make sense at first. There, in the dirt and leaves, were 5 spiders. Big ones. They weren't moving, just sitting there, legs drawn in slightly, like they were waiting. Their eyes were what I'd been seeing. Tiny, pale blue reflections catching the light from my torch. They weren't dewdrops at all, just the eyes of something very much alive. I stood up straight and slowly turned my head, torch sweeping across the undergrowth. And then it hit me. They were everywhere. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them, hiding in the ground cover, perched low on trees, tucked into the folds of bark and branches. I walked a few steps further out and saw even more. On both sides of the trail, my light would hit them, and the reflections would flicker back. 2 eyes, 8 eyes, dozens of glinting little lights staring right back at me. All of them still, just watching. The spiders were about the size of my hand, maybe bigger. Huntsmen's, I think. Not deadly, but fast. Aggressive when startled. I've always hated spiders. Ever since I was a kid. I couldn't even look at photos of them. And now I was surrounded, deep in the bush, in the dark, with nowhere to go. I took a few steps back, trying to keep my breath calm, trying not to bolt. I knew if I panicked, the cadets would notice. The last thing I needed was to set off a chain reaction. No one else had lights. They couldn't see what I was seeing. I swallowed hard, turned around, and walked, quickly, but not too quickly, back to my place at the front of the column. I didn't say a word. We started moving again. I kept my torch low and straight ahead, trying not to think about what was now behind us, or beside us. The rest of the march to the campsite felt endless. Every few minutes, I'd catch another pair of eyes, always watching, always waiting. I stopped scanning the sides altogether. It didn't help. When we finally reached the clearing where we'd set up our camp, I felt this brief moment of relief. A wide open space, cleared out, more sky than canopy above us. There were a few other officers already there, and some tents had been laid out. I busied myself with setup, hammering in pegs, unrolling the mats, checking that everyone was where they should be. But I couldn't stop thinking about the forest floor just a few hundred meters away, and what was still crawling over it. I slept in a zipped-up tent that night, fully closed, everything sealed. I checked it 3 times for gaps. Still, I barely slept. Every sound outside made my heart skip. Every tick of a branch brushing canvas felt like legs on my skin. I kept seeing their eyes behind my lids, glowing blue in the dark. The next morning, we did inspections. A few cadets had minor complaints. Bugs in their boots, something crawling across their faces at night, but no one reported anything serious. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want to admit that I'd nearly lost it the night before. I kept it buried, focused on the routine. The rest of the week wasn't easy. Every hike, every movement through the bush, I saw more of them. Not in the same numbers, not always glowing back at me, but enough to keep my nerves on edge. I'd crouch to tie a bootlace and see one scurry past. I'd lift my pack and one would dart under a rock. Every shadow became a threat, every stick on the ground a trick of the eye. And yet I managed. Somehow, I pitched my tent each night. I went through drills. I led the same path back out at the end of the week. Torch on, heart thudding, eyes always scanning. When we finally left the bush and hit the dirt road back to base, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. No more undergrowth, no more eyes, just open road and the sound of boots on gravel. I didn't tell anyone the full story. Not the officers, not the other cadets. No one needed to know how close I came to losing it out there. I still think about it sometimes. Those tiny glowing dots, scattered like stars in the dirt. But they weren't stars. They were alive, waiting, watching, and I was just one step away from them the whole time. This happened 7 years ago when I was living in a small rented house on the edge of town. The house wasn't anything special, pretty ordinary really, but it had this one weird thing about it that always gave me an uneasy feeling. The house had 2 bathrooms. One was perfectly fine, but the other was broken and completely unusable. Nobody was supposed to use it. It smelled awful every time you opened the door, like a mix of mold and something rotten, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and follows you around. Because of that, I always kept the broken bathroom door bolted and locked from the inside, never letting it swing open even a crack. The house itself was old. The paint was peeling off in some places, the wooden floorboards creaked when you walked, and the windows rattled whenever the wind blew hard. It sat near a small patch of woods, nothing too dense but thick enough that you could get lost if you weren't careful. On most days it was quiet, too quiet maybe. I liked it because I could focus on my studies without distractions, but there was always that underlying tension I couldn't explain, like the house was waiting for something. One night, the weather started turning. The sky grew heavy with dark clouds, and the wind picked up speed, howling like it was warning me. I remember watching the trees outside, their branches thrashing back and forth wildly. The power cut out just as the storm really hit, and everything went pitch black except for the flashes of lightning illuminating the room in sharp, quick bursts. I was sitting alone in the living room, trying to finish some assignments by the dim light from my phone. That's when I heard it, a thudding sound coming from the direction of the broken bathroom. At first, I thought it was just the wind pushing the door or maybe the old house settling. You know how old houses make all kinds of noises when the weather is bad. But the thuds kept coming, slow and steady, like something was hitting or banging on the door. I told myself it was probably just air pressure or the storm messing with the door's frame. It's common for old doors to get pushed or pulled during storms. I tried to ignore it and focus back on my work, but then there was this loud, solid thud, like someone had slammed the door hard from the inside. I swear I saw the bathroom door move just a little bit, as if it had been pushed open. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, staring at the door in the dark. The smell from that bathroom was strong, almost flooding the room, and it made me feel sick. I didn't want to get up and check because it felt wrong, like something bad might be waiting inside. I couldn't stay in the living room any longer. The whole place felt tense and wrong. So, I grabbed my phone and hurried outside to the terrace. The wind was cold and the rain was starting to pour, but I felt safer there, away from the house. From up there, I could see the broken bathroom door. It was slightly open, just like I had seen earlier, except the lock was gone. The bolt that I had put on earlier was missing. I didn't know how it could have come off or disappeared. It didn't make any sense. I stayed on the terrace for hours, just watching the storm rage, not daring to go back inside. Eventually, the power came back, and the lights flickered on. I finally went back down with a flashlight and carefully approached the bathroom door. It was partly closed but not shut tight. The smell was still terrible. I locked it as tightly as I could and even tied a thick rope around the handle to make sure it wouldn't move again. Then I took a deep breath and tried to convince myself it was just a bad night, a coincidence of weather and old house quirks. But the truth is, I didn't sleep well that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept glancing at that bathroom door, expecting it to open again. I was too scared to live there after that, even though nothing else ever happened. The next couple of weeks, I stayed with friends or at my parents' place, trying to shake off the feeling. Eventually, I found a new place to rent and moved out. I never went back to that house. I told myself it was just the storm, the wind, the old house creaking. There was no ghost, no creature, no monster. Just a broken bathroom with a terrible smell and a door that somehow unlocked itself. But even now, whenever I remember that night, the way the door moved on its own and the lock disappeared, it still creeps me out. It's like the house had some secret it didn't want me to know, and I was lucky to get out when I did. I've been careful about where I live since then. I don't like old houses with weird smells or broken doors. There's something about them that messes with your head, makes you imagine things that aren't really there. But that night taught me to trust my gut feeling. If something feels off, it probably is. And sometimes, the scariest things aren't ghosts or shadows. They're just the quiet, strange moments that make you question what's real. When I was younger, I went elk hunting with my uncle and some of his friends in the deep woods of Idaho. It was late November, and the air was sharp and cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. The forest was dense, with towering pines and firs stretching up into a darkening sky. The ground beneath us was hard and frozen, covered with a thin layer of snow that crunched under every step. I had been hunting with them for a few days already, but nothing prepared me for what happened on that one evening when I went out with Tyler, one of my uncle's buddies. We had been tracking a big bull elk all day, moving slow and careful through the thick trees and rocky ridges. The elk had been elusive, but just about 30 minutes before dark, Tyler got a clean shot. The elk dropped not far from where we stood, a few hundred yards from the main trail back to camp. We moved quickly to get to it before the last light faded. The sky was already streaked with bruised purple and orange, the sun dipping behind the mountains. Tyler and I worked fast, pulling out our knives and starting to gut the elk. The cold was biting, and our breath came out in white clouds. We had learned from previous hunts not to break down the animal too much at night, just gutting it enough to keep the meat from spoiling until we could bring the whole team back in the morning. The altitude was about 10,000 feet, and with the temperatures dropping well below freezing at night, bugs wouldn't touch the carcass. As Tyler cut and cleaned, I stayed alert, eyes flicking into the dark woods around us. It was quiet except for the occasional snapping of a branch or the soft whistle of a breeze through the needles. Then, in the distance, we heard it. A wolf's howl, low and mournful. At first, it was faint, almost lost in the sounds of the forest settling for night. But it didn't stop. Came again, louder, closer. Then more howls joined in, weaving together in a haunting chorus. The wolves were coming. With every minute that passed, the howling grew louder, more urgent, echoing off the trees and rocks. The smell in the air shifted, too. It wasn't just the cold or the damp earth anymore. There was a thick, heavy smell of death, like decayed meat and dry fur, hanging close and growing stronger. The sun disappeared below the ridges, and the sky darkened from deep blue to black. Tyler flicked on the bill light on his cap, and I pulled out my mini mag light, the small beam cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. The only things we could see clearly were the elk carcass and the spot around it where we worked. The trees around us turned into dark shapes, shadows pressing in. The howling kept circling closer. At first, I thought maybe it was just a pack of 3 or 4, but it felt like dozens. The sounds bounced back and forth, sharp barks and yelps coming from every direction, running and slinking through the underbrush. Every now and then, a wolf would break from the pack and dart into the clearing, only a few feet away from us, trying to snap at a piece of the elk. Tyler would throw rocks or shout, but it only seemed to make them more restless. I could feel my heart pounding hard in my chest. The cold had nothing on the raw fear twisting inside me. We were surrounded out here in the middle of nowhere, just 2 guys with a dead elk and a pack of hungry wolves. There was no way to outrun them in the dark, no way to fight them off. All I could do was keep shining my light, trying to spot them whenever they moved, trying to keep calm. Tyler worked as fast as he could, hands steady but quick, trying to finish gutting and cleaning the elk. We didn't want to leave it any longer than necessary, but we also couldn't just carry the whole thing out in the dark. We made a scent circle, arranging bits of guts and blood to keep the wolves occupied and away from the parts we planned to come back for in the morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was all we had. Finally, we finished what we could and started the hike back to camp. The trail was rough, rocky, covered in frozen dirt, steep in places, and now we were both soaked in elk blood. It clung to our clothes and gloves, sticky and cold, mixing with sweat and dirt. The wolves didn't stop following. We could hear their paws thudding on the frozen ground behind us, the rustle of brush as they closed in. Every so often, a low growl or a sharp bark would remind us how close they were. The night was thick and cold, the kind of dark where you can't tell how far away the trees end. We moved fast, stepping carefully but without pause. I kept swinging the flashlight behind us, catching glimpses of wolves slipping through the shadows, watching, waiting. At one point, I almost tripped on a root, and my heart jumped. Tyler grabbed my arm, pulling me back upright. We kept moving, neither of us saying much, just pushing toward camp and the safety of the group waiting for us. It felt like hours before we finally saw the faint glow of lanterns through the trees. Our voices and footsteps must have carried because the pack started to pull back, the howling fading into the night. When we reached camp, the other guys were ready with their lights and gear. They helped us get the elk fully processed and packed up before the first light of dawn. That night stayed with me like a shadow. The fear, the cold, the feeling of being trapped. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The wolves weren't some story or a distant threat. They were real, close enough to touch, circling in the deep woods, drawn by the scent of blood and death. It was a harsh reminder of just how wild and unforgiving the wilderness can be. Even now, years later, when I think back to that night, I can still hear the howls echoing through the trees. I can still smell the iron tang of blood and feel the weight of the darkness pressing in from all sides. It was, without question, the most terrifying experience of my life. A raw, brutal night where survival wasn't just about skill or luck, but about staying calm and moving through the dark, one step at a time. When I was a kid, I lived on this tiny piece of land deep in the woods. The house was old, built long before I was born, but what made it strange was that it was basically built around old stables. The stables were mostly gone by the time I lived there, except for the part where my room was. My room was exactly where the hay used to be stacked. Even though no hay had been there for years, sometimes, when I was lying in bed, I could catch a faint smell of it. It was strange, like a dry, dusty, sweet smell that would come out of nowhere. No one else ever noticed it, just me. The house itself was weird in other ways too. It had 3 entrance doors, one at the front, one at the back, and one on the side. Sometimes late at night I'd hear knocking. Not the usual kind you get from a person knocking to be let in. It was slow and rhythmic, but sometimes it would happen all at once on all 3 doors. It didn't sound like anyone was there when I checked, but the knocking was definitely real. It wasn't the wind either. The doors were heavy and sturdy, and the knocks didn't match any kind of weather or animal sounds. My dog, who was my closest companion back then, hated going upstairs. The house had 2 floors, and the stairs were wooden and creaky. I remember how every time I tried to bring him upstairs, he'd freeze halfway, hack his nose like he was smelling something awful, and then refuse to move. It was like he saw something I couldn't. He'd growl low and then run back downstairs or hide under the kitchen table until I took him back down. I never pressed him too hard because it freaked me out. But the weirdest thing was what happened in my room. My window was huge, taking up almost an entire wall, and it looked out over the woods. The backyard was really just a clearing surrounded by thick trees. The woods felt endless beyond that. I used to sit there a lot, just staring at the trees, listening to the sounds of the forest. One night, something happened that I still think about, and honestly, it still messes with me. I was in bed, probably around 10 or 11 years old, and I heard a kid giggling. It was a soft, high-pitched giggle that sounded like it was coming from upstairs, right outside my door. It wasn't the kind of giggle you'd expect from someone playing. It had this eerie, breathy quality, like someone trying not to be heard but couldn't help themselves. I jumped out of bed and ran upstairs, my heart pounding. I wanted to catch whoever was there. But when I got there, the hallway was empty. My window, the big one in my room, was wide open. I never left it open at night because it got cold and bugs would come in. But that night, it was open, swinging gently in the breeze. Then I saw something move just for a second, a dark figure running into the woods outside. It was small, like a kid, and it disappeared almost instantly into the trees. I ran out to the backyard to see if I could find anything, but there was nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had been there. Just the quiet rustling of the leaves in the night. For the next 2 years, I stayed in that house, but I never felt safe again. I kept the windows locked tight, and I never went upstairs alone. The knocking kept happening sometimes. The smell of hay still appeared out of nowhere in my room, and my dog never wanted to go upstairs. But I never heard the giggling again. Some people might think I was just imagining things, or that kids from nearby were messing with me. But that didn't make sense. The house was on private land, surrounded by thick woods, with a huge iron gate at the only entrance. Climbing it would be hard for anyone, especially kids. And if someone fell from my window to the garden below, it would be a long, painful fall. There's no way a kid would just run away after that. I never found out who or what was running in the woods that night, and I don't think I want to. The whole place felt like it was holding on to something from the past, some kind of leftover presence from when it was still stables. Maybe it was the smell of the hay, or the way the wood creaked under the weight of years. But whatever it wasn't something friendly. Looking back now, I realized that house was never just a house. It was a place where old things didn't die, they just waited. Waiting for someone to notice them. Waiting for someone to hear the knocking on the doors in the dead of night, or smell the hay drifting through the air like a memory. Waiting for a kid to catch a glimpse of something running fast and quiet into the woods. Something that didn't belong in the world I knew. I don't live there anymore. I moved away as soon as I could. But every now and then, I still get that smell in my mind, the smell of hay on a cold night. And sometimes, I wonder if whatever was there is still waiting, still watching from the edge of the trees. And I'm glad I'm not there to see it again.